March 13, 2019 seemed like an ordinary night for Franky Boy Cali. He was at his home in Staten Island when something grabbed his attention. Outside, he heard a driver run into his car. The Mafia leader went to see if there was any damage, but what he thought was a minor car accident was really something deeper. The driver had ulterior motives. All he needed was to get Franky Boy outside. When the mob boss approached the person who ran into his car, he was met at gunpoint. The murder of Franky Boy Cali shocked the nation. This was the first public murder of a mob boss since Paul Castellano was assassinated in 1985. At first, investigators were under the impression that it was an inside job. They were preparing for a full-blown mafia war. But everyone was shocked when they found out who was holding the gun that night. The motives that brought him to Franky's Staten Island home were even more twisted than authorities could have expected. In today's video, we're going to uncover the vendetta and conspiracy theories that led to Francesco Franky Boy Cali's murder. Was it really an inside job, or did an outsider's obsession grow to an unhinged level? Stay tuned to find out. Francesco Cali was born on March 26, 1965. Now, a lot of mafia figures we talk about got involved with crime at an early age, but with Franky Boy, it's a different story. He actually grew up with a clean record. If he was involved in any crimes before the mafia, he did a good job of covering his tracks. It wasn't his desire to lead a life of crime that brought him into the mafia. Franky Boy had a lot of ties to organized crime. He was the nephew-in-law of John Gambino and also had relatives who were part of the Bonanno crime family. Several close friends of his were also tied to the Sicilian mafia, including Jackie D'Amico, who was a lieutenant for John Gotti. Even in romance, Franky Boy couldn't escape the mafia. He fell in love and married Rosaria Inzerillo, whose family was deeply rooted in the Sicilian mafia. Franky Boy knew the mafia inside and out. He had connections in all the right places and was able to win over high-ranking mafia members, building up a long list of allies. Mafia figures trusted him, and he was able to work his way up the ranks successfully. In 2012, he was appointed the underboss of the Gambino family. The following year, there were rumors swirling that he was offered the position of boss but turned it down. However, by 2015, he rose to power and became the Gambino crime family boss. Of course, no mafia boss is 100% innocent, but Franky Boy managed to keep one of the lowest profiles in mafia boss history. Even authorities were impressed at how this man, who basically grew up in the world of organized crime, managed to do business without racking up arrest records. In fact, throughout his entire mafia career, he only had one arrest. In 2008, his criminal activities caught up to him. In February, he was arrested along with 61 other Cosa Nostra figures for racketeering charges. And in June, he was charged with conspiracy to extort money. He ended up staying in prison until April 2009. His record may not have been sparkling clean, but it's very minor when you compare it with other mafia bosses throughout history. The modern era of mafia activities is nowhere near as violent as it was decades ago. Authorities have cracked down on these crime families and strengthened their investigation tactics. Because of this, the mob operates differently than they did when figures like John Gotti were running things. That's why the world was in shock to hear of Franky Boy's murder on March 13, 2019. All that was known was that something triggered Franky Boy to go outside that night around 9:20 p.m., where he met his demise. At first, investigators thought that this was an inside job. They were under the impression that it could have been a rival or another Gambino member who wanted to take the head of the family out. If this were the case, it could have blown into a full mob war. Franky Boy was the boss, seen as a senior figure in the mafia. If another mafia member wanted to take him out, they would need to have permission. If they didn't get permission and killed him anyway, this would result in disastrous consequences. Investigators were under the impression that Franky Boy received a text or a call that lured him outside. That's where he was confronted by his assassin, but security footage caught the incident on camera. What really happened that night was something that even Nostradamus couldn't have predicted. It wasn't a phone call or a message that brought Franky Boy outside that night. What really brought him out there was the sound of another driver crashing their pickup truck into his parked SUV. Allegedly, he went outside to check if there was any damage to his vehicle. When he got to his vehicle, he was confronted by the driver. They briefly spoke about something, then the driver pulled out a gun and started shooting. Franky Boy attempted to use his SUV as a shield but was unsuccessful. The driver shot him 10 times, killing him on the spot. This security footage showed investigators who the killer really was. It was something unlike any other mafia murder in history. The killer wasn't a skilled mafia hitman. In fact, this killer had absolutely zero ties to the mafia. There's a set code when it comes to murders in the mafia. All organized crime comes with a contract. Mafia members are only supposed to inflict violence against others on the inside. They are also not supposed to kill anyone who isn't connected to the Mafia. Despite this rule, there have been cases throughout history where mobsters have killed people who weren't connected to the Mafia. But until the murder of Franky Boy, it was unheard of for an outsider to kill a Mafia member, let alone a mob boss. So, who killed Francesco Franky Boy Cali that night? It was a young man named Anthony Comello, who was only 24 years old at the time of the murder. Authorities were expecting the killer to be a trained Mafia hitman with years of experience, someone who knew what they were doing. The last person they expected it to be was someone who couldn't even legally order a beer when Franky Boy became mob boss. But there was no denying what was seen in that security footage. Investigators had their suspect. But now for the real question: why? When the news of Franky's murder first made waves, investigators were trying to pinpoint the reason. Did Franky do something that invoked this killer to target him? Or was the killer a rival that had the motivation to get him out of the way? Since the killer wasn't connected to any Mafia group, authorities wrote off the idea of wanting to get Franky Boy out of the way. Instead, they focused on the idea of a possible vendetta. Did Franky already have a history with the young man? One theory came forward that shed a bit of light on a possible vendetta. There was word going around that Anthony Comello had started a romantic relationship with Franky Boy's niece. Franky gave the niece strict orders not to date the young man. Could a broken heart have led him to kill a mob boss? Although this theory seemed plausible at the time, it wasn't even close to the real reason behind the assassination. There is video evidence that Anthony Comello shot Franky Boy. That is something that cannot be denied. But what was his reason? Well, according to his lawyer, Anthony was trying to help Donald Trump, the US president at the time of the killing. As his lawyer tells it, when Anthony got in his truck that night to drive to Franky Boy's house, the intentions were not to murder him. Apparently, he was there to arrest the Gambino family boss. Okay, so before we get into Anthony's real motive, let's shed some light on his background. We do need to take a trip down this bumpy path to understand why this young man thought trying to arrest a mob boss was a good idea. Anthony Comello grew up in Staten Island. He graduated from high school in 2012 and began working odd construction jobs. Before the killing, he lived with his parents. His family mentioned that he wasn't into politics when he was younger, but that changed after the 2016 presidential election. He became infatuated with QAnon. As investigators looked through his social media, they uncovered a world of conspiracy theories. This passed a mere curiosity into a delusional obsession. It evolved to the point where Anthony Comello believed that there were people working in the deep state trying to ruin America. His mission with QAnon was to put a stop to this. He allegedly started to believe that Q was speaking to him directly and gave him inside information on the deep state. Anthony was even under the impression that he would be granted full protection from President Trump for his role. According to his lawyers, his believed role was to make citizen arrests of those allegedly involved in the deep state. Before his run-in with Franky Boy, Anthony had already made arrest attempts. He had attempted and failed to arrest 3 Democratic political figures who were known for criticizing Donald Trump. This included Maxine Walters and Adam Schiff, who were Democrat representatives. Allegedly, he asked U.S. Marshals for help with these arrests but was denied. He also tried to arrest the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who he believed was guilty of election fraud. As his lawyer claims, the run-in with Franky Boy was intended to be a citizen arrest. Anthony strongly believed that the deep state was involved with organized crime. He was under the impression that Franky Boy and the Gambino family were connected to the deep state. Since this crime took place, a lot of people have given Anthony Comello the title of New York's dumbest killer. Even the top law authorities have challenges and barriers to taking down Mafia members, especially the highest-ranking members. But Anthony truly believed that he could arrest the Gambino family boss and hand him over to the military. He even brought a pair of handcuffs to the scene of the crime. When Franky Boy came outside after hearing his vehicle get hit, Anthony Comello was waiting for him. Allegedly, Anthony informed him of why he was there and ordered him to submit to the citizen arrest. Of course, Franky Boy wasn't going to obey. The exchange ended up getting heated. Anthony claims that Franky made a furtive action with his hand. This allegedly had him fearing for his life, so he started shooting. As investigators covered this case, they couldn't determine the exact root of Anthony's belief that the Gambino family and Mafia were connected to the deep state. But based on his social media activity, they believe he may have come across a post suggesting it. Anthony engaged with thousands of posts and forums that focused on deep state conspiracy theories. Anthony Comello was arrested at his family's home after the murder took place. When he appeared in court, he flashed messages on the palms of his hands to reporters and media. He had messages scribbled saying, "MAGA forever, Patriots in charge, and United we stand MAGA." No matter how Anthony's lawyer tried to spin the story to make it seem like his client wasn't there to murder Franky Boy that night intentionally, there was no denying that he was guilty of the crime. This brought to light a much bigger issue. What would happen to Anthony Comello? If he were to be sent to prison, there would be a huge target on his back. There are several members of the Gambino crime family and their allies behind bars. It was public news that Anthony killed Franky Boy, a very loyal and high-ranking Mafia member. These people had the utmost respect for Franky and wouldn't think twice about getting revenge. There was also concern about what would happen to his family. It was even stated that after the killing, he sent texts saying, "I'm on the run and my family is marked." When someone screws over the mob, it's not just themselves they put at risk. They also risk the lives of their family members and closest allies. Allegedly, his family offered to pay a $1 million bond to have Anthony released on house arrest. His father even wanted to show up to the trial. However, law enforcement advised him not to because they feared an assassination attempt. It's not publicly known whether or not the Comello family received protection. During the trial, Anthony Comello showed many signs of being mentally unfit. He allegedly went into a rambling monologue at one point where he claimed to have information about human trafficking and drug smuggling. In June 2020, Judge William E. Garnett ordered Anthony to be sent to a mental health facility for further evaluation. After his arrest, there has been very limited information available about Franky Boy's killer. No recent developments have come forward about him since this trial. However, it is believed that he likely has protection in custody, as many high-profile inmates do. Franky Boy Cali's assassination shook the modern Mafia world. This killing didn't just affect members of the Gambino family. When the news first broke, authorities were on edge, thinking that the next Mafia war was in the making. Once they discovered who was really responsible and why, they knew they had a high-profile case on their hands. Anthony Comello's passion for politics likely caused him to spiral into an unhealthy world of conspiracy theories. He was traveling a fine line between reality and delusion. When he arrived at Franky Boy's home that evening, he believed he was on a mission for QAnon, or at least that's how his lawyer tells it. We know that Anthony Comello is responsible for the crime, but due to his mental health state, the exact reason why is still up in the air. Do you think he was really there that night to place a citizen arrest on Franky Boy, or do you think it was his plan all along? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. That's all for today's story. Thank you for staying tuned to the end. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to see more Mafia Mystique content.